The classroom buzzed with the soft shuffle of students settling into their seats. The hum of whispers filled the air as laptops clicked open, notebooks rustled, and chairs scraped across the floor. A slight tension seemed to hover over the room, like the moment before a storm breaks. The professor stood at the front, poised and ready, her sharp eyes scanning the students, already preparing for her next intellectual assault. Professor Riley had always been known for her razor-sharp critiques. Her voice, steady, deliberate, was like a whip, cracking with precision. Today it was no different, but this time there was something more. Something colder, more calculated in her tone. As she adjusted her glasses, she turned her gaze to the class and began speaking, her words piercing through the chatter, drawing everyone's attention with a force that was impossible to ignore. "Let's talk about ethics in business," she began, her voice carrying easily across the room, sharp and unwavering. "And let's talk about a man who has become synonymous with both success and failure, Donald Trump." The words hung in the air like an old, unplayed song. There was a slight crackle in the atmosphere, like the static before a radio station cuts in, jarring and uncomfortable. It was as if the world itself paused, listening for what would come next. Her lips curled into a faint smile, a look not of amusement, but of something darker. "A so-called billionaire whose ethics are as questionable as his hairline," she said, her words dripping with sarcasm. A nervous laugh rippled through the room, an awkward, collective exhale. But the laughter quickly died, replaced by an uneasy silence that settled deeper than the professor's biting remarks. Barron Trump sat in the front row. His back was straight, his hands resting calmly on the desk in front of him, his face expressionless. His jaw was slightly clenched, the only sign of tension. The glow from the fluorescent lights above flickered momentarily, casting a soft, uneasy shadow across his features. But he said nothing. His gaze remained fixed on the notebook before him, the faintest flicker of emotion behind his calm exterior. As the professor continued, the room seemed to grow colder. Every word she spoke was a carefully chosen jab, each sentence cutting deeper into the quiet tension that had built up in the air. "Let's discuss his business ventures," she said, her tone sharp and unforgiving. Overinflated, overhyped, failures masquerading as success. The art of the deal? More like the art of overpromising and underdelivering. The words felt heavier with every beat, like stones being dropped into an already full well. The air was thick now, as if it carried the weight of the years of media buzz and public opinion that had shaped everyone's view of Donald Trump. But it wasn't just about him anymore. It was about something else, something more personal. Barron's fingers tightened slightly around the edge of his notebook, his grip almost imperceptible to those around him. His eyes, however, seemed to flicker just for a moment, toward the professor, then back down again, studying the paper before him. He could feel the eyes of the room on him now, even though no one dared to look at him directly. The weight of their gaze felt heavy on his shoulders, their thoughts pressing in like an unseen weight. The professor's voice rose again, sharper now, like the crackle of static that warns of an impending storm. She pressed on with her criticisms, pointing out every misstep, every failure, the bankruptcy of high-profile projects, the way he had spun failure into a narrative of genius. Barron felt the room tightening around him. He was no longer just a witness to the words being spoken. He was now part of the conversation. His father's name had been dragged through the dirt, and with it, his own sense of self was being pulled into the spotlight. He could almost hear the collective thought of the students in the room. Is he going to say something? Will he defend him? But Barron stayed still, his thoughts like a slow-moving river, churning with conflicting emotions. What would I say? The question echoed through his mind. He had always been taught to remain composed, to think before reacting. But how could he remain silent when so much was being said? His gaze flickered to the window, where the light outside was beginning to fade, casting the room in a soft, golden hue. A subtle reminder that the world kept moving, indifferent to the words that were being thrown around the room. Pause for thought. Have you ever been caught in a moment where the words of others seem to hang in the air, and you're not sure whether to speak or stay silent? As the professor's critique reached its peak, Barron shifted in his seat. His hand moved ever so slightly, almost imperceptible to anyone but himself. As he raised his hand, his fingers trembling ever so slightly, the room went still. The subtle sound of his fingers tapping against his desk seemed to echo in the quiet. Every eye was now on him, waiting, expecting. He let the moment stretch, the silence like a thin thread that could snap at any second. Then he spoke, his voice steady, calm, but carrying an edge that made everyone pause. "There's something else I'd like to share, if that's okay," he said, his words measured, each one deliberate. The professor's eyes met his, a slight surprise crossing her features, but she nodded. She hadn't expected this. Barron leaned forward, his gaze never leaving hers. "My father taught me something else about success," he continued, his voice softer now, but the weight of his words felt even more significant. "He taught me that behind every achievement, there's a team of people who made it possible. It's not just about one person, it's about everyone who contributed, who believed in the vision, even when things seemed impossible." The room seemed to breathe with him, the tension lifting just slightly. Barron's gaze swept the room, as if looking for something, perhaps understanding, perhaps reassurance. He wasn't defending his father out of blind loyalty. No, this was different. This was about a truth he had seen with his own eyes. He paused, the silence hanging heavy, like the stillness of a room after a storm has passed. Pause for thought. How do we find the courage to stand up for what we believe in, even when it feels like the world is against us? Barron's words, though soft, were filled with a quiet strength. They resonated not just with the professor, but with everyone in the room. A moment passed, and then the professor, still standing at the front, let her marker drop gently onto the desk. She regarded him not with the same sharpness as before, but with a softness that seemed to carry a newfound respect. The classroom, once thick with judgment, had changed in the span of a few words, and in that moment, Barron Trump had done something few others could. He had shifted the narrative, not with anger or defensiveness, but with understanding. The flickering light above cast a soft, uncertain shadow on Barron's face, as if the room itself was waiting to see what would happen next. Would the tension break, or would it hold, suspended in time, forever? The room seemed to hold its breath. Barron's words had just lingered in the air, the weight of them settling into the space between him and the professor. The sharpness of his defense had softened the tension, but only slightly. There was still a quiet pulse that reverberated through the classroom, like the faint hum of a distant radio, one that only a few could hear but all could feel. Professor Riley remained still for a moment, her eyes fixed on Barron, studying him as though searching for the hidden meaning behind his words. She was not used to this. In her years of teaching, she had faced many students, many opinions, but none had ever felt quite like this. There was something in his calmness, something beneath the surface that made her pause, reconsider the force of her earlier criticisms. She adjusted her glasses slowly, the soft click of the metal frame echoing in the silence. She glanced at the clock on the wall, a mere distraction from the weight of the moment. The seconds ticked by as if reluctant to move forward. Barron could feel it now. The room had changed, the atmosphere thick with unspoken thoughts. The students, who had once leaned in to catch every biting word from the professor, now watched him intently. They were unsure whether to be uncomfortable or admiring. His silence, at first a shield, had now become his most powerful weapon. He wasn't angry, wasn't defensive. He had said what needed to be said, and now he sat in the quiet aftermath, a quiet storm in the calm. His eyes wandered again, this time to the window, where the early afternoon light spilled through the blinds, casting thin lines across the desk. The light flickered for a brief second, a sign of the storm inside him that still hadn't passed. He hadn't expected to speak, hadn't planned for this. But here he was in the center of it all, holding his ground with nothing more than words and the weight of his conviction. Was I wrong to speak up? The thought briefly flashed in his mind. But no, he knew this was the right moment. He had never been one to seek the spotlight, but this was more than just defending his father. This was about defending the idea of fairness, of seeing the whole picture, not just the headlines. The professor cleared her throat, as if trying to break the silence that had stretched too far. She stood at the front of the room, her posture straight, but her voice softer now, less certain. "You're right," she said, her words slower than before, measured, as if she were choosing each one with care. Criticism is necessary, but you're also right that it's easy to fall into the trap of blaming one person for everything that's wrong in the world. Barron's gaze remained steady, unyielding. What do we gain from tearing someone down completely, he thought, not just about his father, but about everyone who had been the subject of a public trial. The problem with that, he said quietly, is that it oversimplifies things. It reduces complex situations into something that fits a narrative. But people aren't one-dimensional. No one is. A faint murmur of agreement rippled through the room, but it was quiet, almost reluctant. The students, unsure of how to respond, shifted in their seats, their eyes darting between Barron and the professor, watching as the two figures, so different, yet so alike in this moment, sought to understand each other through the fragile space between them. The professor took a step back from the podium, her face unreadable now. She wasn't sure where to go from here. The conversation had taken a turn she hadn't anticipated. She wasn't accustomed to students challenging her so directly, so calmly. It unsettled her, and yet it made her think. Barron watched her carefully. He didn't want to provoke her. He didn't want to make this about winning or losing. It was never about that. "I don't expect everyone to agree with me," he continued, his voice steady, but there was something softer there now, something vulnerable. "But I think we should strive to see the truth in its entirety, not just the parts we want to see." The classroom, once tense with anticipation, seemed to breathe again. The nervous energy had dissipated, replaced by something more reflective, more thoughtful. Even the fluorescent lights above flickered softly, as if responding to the shifting mood in the room. The moments stretched on, slow and deliberate. Each second seemed to pull the room closer to a new understanding, one that wasn't based on sharp divides, but on the delicate thread of empathy that Barron had woven through his words. The professor nodded slowly, her lips pressing together in a tight line as she considered his words. Empathy. It was a word that felt foreign in the context of their discussion. Yet here it was, sitting at the heart of it all, demanding recognition. She looked at him, and for the first time she saw not just the son of a controversial figure, but a person. A young man trying to find his own voice in a world that seemed determined to silence it. Pause for thought. How many times have we, too, judged someone without seeing the full story? "Maybe you're right," she said finally, her voice quieter now, almost apologetic. "Maybe I've been too quick to pass judgment. It's easy to see things in black and white, to focus only on the failures, but there's more to it, isn't there?" Barron nodded slowly. "There's always more to it." A long silence followed. The kind of silence that spoke louder than any words could. The kind that made you reconsider everything you thought you knew. It was as if the room, too, was reconsidering, weighing Barron's words and letting them settle into their minds like the first drops of rain after a long drought. The soft light from the window continued to flicker, casting uneven shadows on the desks. The radio hum in the background had faded, replaced by the quiet hum of reflection. Barron felt a shift inside him, one he hadn't expected. This moment wasn't about defending his father, or even about the professor. It was about understanding. It was about learning to see beyond the surface, to dig deeper into the stories that were often left untold. As the conversation drew to a close, Barron felt the weight of the room lift. Not because the discussion had ended, but because something had changed. Something had shifted, like a seed planted in the soil waiting to grow. And for a moment Barron felt the flicker of hope. A quiet, steady glow. The room felt like it had drawn a collective breath and was holding it, waiting. The seconds ticked on, slow and heavy, like the last drops of a clock winding down. Barron's words had hung in the air, but the space between him and the professor felt charged, as though something was about to shift. The tension was thick, an almost tangible thing that clung to the walls, to the ceiling, to the very floor beneath them. The soft, rhythmic hum of the overhead lights flickered. The sound reminiscent of an old radio tuning in and out. A slight buzz, almost imperceptible, as if the room itself were charged with the energy of the moment. Every student, every single person present, had locked eyes on Barron, awaiting his next move. The weight of the moment pressed down on him, but Barron remained still, his gaze steady, his face unreadable, but inside, emotions churned like a storm waiting to break. What will they think of me after this? A quiet voice whispered in the back of his mind. But Barron silenced it. Now wasn't the time for doubt. Now was the time for truth, for clarity. He had spoken once, but this moment was more than just a defense. It was a chance to step forward, to speak not just for his father, but for something bigger. A few students shifted uneasily in their seats. Others barely moved, as if frozen by the intensity of the silence that had settled over the room. Barron could feel the weight of their stares, curiosity, judgment, and perhaps a faint sense of anticipation. They were waiting for him to falter, to rise to the challenge, or perhaps to shrink back. But Barron didn't shrink. He leaned in. "I understand," he began, his voice calm but firm, like a steady hand in the storm, "that public figures like my father are always open to criticism. They should be." The words felt natural, coming from a place of deep reflection. His father had been in the spotlight for decades, subjected to scrutiny and harsh judgment from every angle. Barron had seen it all, witnessed the way the world seemed to reduce his father's life and work to nothing more than headlines and sound bites. But Barron's voice deepened, the room growing even quieter. "There's a difference between constructive criticism and scapegoating." The words hung there, resonating in the stillness. The hum of the lights seemed to fade into the background, as if the universe itself was listening, waiting for the next revelation. His words weren't just aimed at the professor anymore. They were for everyone in the room, the silent judgments they had passed, the narratives they had bought into without ever questioning them. His hands gripped the edges of the desk before him, his knuckles turning white, but his voice never wavered. "Am I doing the right thing?" he thought, as doubt crept in again, but it was fleeting, like a shadow passing through the trees. "You see," he continued, his voice softer now, but no less certain, "we all have flaws, my father included. But we also have strengths. It's easy to forget the latter when the focus is only on the flaws." For a moment, everything stopped. There was no sound except for the soft ticking of the clock on the wall, a reminder of time moving forward, 1 second at a time, unyielding. Barron let the silence stretch, feeling the weight of the room pressing in. His eyes flickered briefly to the professor, then back to the class. What will they do with this? The question lingered in his mind. Pause for thought. Have you ever found yourself caught between what you know is right and what others expect of you? Professor Riley stood motionless. Her expression had softened, but there was something else there now. Something unspoken. It wasn't just the sharpness of her critique that had faltered, it was the understanding that had begun to creep in. She wasn't used to this kind of response. She wasn't used to hearing someone so young, so poised, challenge the narrative in such a calm, collected manner. She looked at Barron now with something different in her eyes. Respect, perhaps, or maybe just a deep recognition of the courage it took to stand up and say what he had said. The power in his words wasn't in how loudly they had been spoken, but in how much they had made her reconsider everything she had believed to be true. Barron's gaze didn't waver. He wasn't seeking approval. He wasn't looking for validation. His father's name had been dragged through the mud for years, but Barron wasn't here to erase that. He was here to show that there was more to the story. We all have our stories, he thought, and some of them are far more complex than anyone is willing to see. He paused for a moment, just long enough for the room to fully absorb his words. Then he continued, his voice quieter now, as if the storm had passed and the calm was settling in. No one achieves anything alone. It's always about the team, the people behind the scenes who work tirelessly to make the vision a reality. That's something my father taught me, and it's something I believe with every part of me. There was a slight shift in the room, as if the air itself had changed. The flicker of the lights above seemed less unsettling now. The students, who had been hanging on to every word, now sat quietly, reflecting on what Barron had said. It wasn't just a defense of his father. It was an invitation to look beyond the surface, to question the narratives they had been fed, to see the complexity in every story. Professor Riley set down her marker slowly, her fingers brushing the worn edge of the podium. Her gaze softened as she met Barron's eyes, but there was something else there too, a small, quiet acknowledgement. "You're right," she said, her voice almost a whisper, but filled with a newfound depth. "There's more to the story. I may have been too quick to pass judgment. I wasn't seeing the full picture." The words were simple, but in that moment, they carried more weight than any critique she had made before. Barron nodded once, his expression calm, but the storm inside him had passed. He wasn't angry anymore. He wasn't defensive. He was simply at peace with the truth. Finally, Professor Riley spoke, her voice filled with an unexpected humility. "You know, Barron, I've been teaching for over 20 years, and I can count on one hand the number of times a student has made me rethink everything I thought I knew." Barron looked at her, his eyes soft, not seeking approval, but understanding. "It wasn't about changing your mind," he said quietly. "It was about finding a space where we could both see the truth, even if it's not the whole truth." She nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "And I think we both found it today." Barron nodded, feeling something deep stir inside him, an understanding that went beyond words. He wasn't just changing minds, he was helping people see. And that, he realized, was enough. As the sun dipped lower, casting a soft golden glow over the courtyard, Barron sat in the quiet company of his professor, the world around them fading into the background. The moment stretched on, slow and meaningful, like the end of a song that you never want to end. And in that moment, Barron understood something he hadn't before. The journey to understanding isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's the quiet moments that matter the most. And as the shadows lengthened, he knew that this was just the beginning. In life, it's easy to judge others based on what we've heard or what we've seen on the surface. However, every person has their own unique story, filled with triumphs and failures that may not always be visible to the outside world. What's important is that we don't judge someone solely based on their mistakes or achievements. Instead, we must look at them as a whole, including their values, contributions, and untold experiences. Barron Trump's story in the script reminds us that the truth is often not just in the negative aspects we see most clearly, but also in the positive qualities we might overlook. Learning to see others from different perspectives, with understanding and compassion, not only helps us form a fairer view, but also builds stronger relationships. When faced with challenges, remember that every story has two sides, and understanding the untold parts can bring peace and wisdom into our lives. If this story resonated with you, if you feel inspired to look beyond the surface and see the deeper truths in life, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. By doing so, you'll stay connected to more meaningful content that inspires reflection and growth. Together, let's keep spreading the message of understanding and compassion. And remember, may God bless America. Finally, Professor Riley spoke, her voice filled with an unexpected humility. "You know, Barron, I've been teaching for over 20 years, and I can count on one hand the number of times a student has made me rethink everything I thought I knew." Barron looked at her, his eyes soft, not seeking approval, but understanding. "It wasn't about changing your mind," he said quietly. "It was about finding a space where we could both see the truth, even if it's not the whole truth." She nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "And I think we both found it today." Barron nodded, feeling something deep stir inside him, an understanding that went beyond words. He wasn't just changing minds, he was helping people see. And that, he realized, was enough. As the sun dipped lower, casting a soft golden glow over the courtyard, Barron sat in the quiet company of his professor, the world around them fading into the background. The moment stretched on, slow and meaningful, like the end of a song that you never want to end. And in that moment, Barron understood something he hadn't before. The journey to understanding isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's the quiet moments that matter the most. And as the shadows lengthened, he knew that this was just the beginning. In life, it's easy to judge others based on what we've heard or what we've seen on the surface. However, every person has their own unique story, filled with triumphs and failures that may not always be visible to the outside world. What's important is that we don't judge someone solely based on their mistakes or achievements. Instead, we must look at them as a whole, including their values, contributions, and untold experiences. Barron Trump's story in the script reminds us that the truth is often not just in the negative aspects we see most clearly, but also in the positive qualities we might overlook. Learning to see others from different perspectives, with understanding and compassion, not only helps us form a fairer view, but also builds stronger relationships. When faced with challenges, remember that every story has two sides, and understanding the untold parts can bring peace and wisdom into our lives. If this story resonated with you, if you feel inspired to look beyond the surface and see the deeper truths in life, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. By doing so, you'll stay connected to more meaningful content that inspires reflection and growth. Together, let's keep spreading the message of understanding and compassion. And remember, may God bless America. Pause for thought. How often do we truly challenge the stories that have been told about us? He reached the door to the courtyard, the soft hum of students still drifting through the hall. But outside, the light was different. The sky was tinged with soft hues of orange and pink, a quiet reminder that even the toughest days end with a moment of peace. Barron stopped for a moment, taking it in, letting the cool breeze settle the tension that had been building in his chest all day. As he stepped outside, the sunlight touched his face, and for a second, he felt a strange sense of clarity, like the fog had finally lifted. The air was fresh, crisp, and filled with the promise of something new. He didn't have all the answers, and he didn't need them. But he had found something deeper today, something within himself that he hadn't fully understood before. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a quiet vibration that pulled him out of his thoughts. He pulled it out, his heart giving a small flutter when he saw the message from his mother. "Heard about your class today. Proud of you." A smile tugged at the corner of his lips. It wasn't just the words that touched him. It was the knowing. His mother had always seen him for who he was, even when the world saw only the shadow of his father. He typed a quick reply, his fingers moving with ease, sending a message back. "Thanks, Mom. I'll call later." He slipped the phone back into his pocket, feeling a warmth spread through him. He wasn't just the son of a famous figure anymore. He was Barron, a person in his own right, carving out his place in a world that often overlooked him. Pause for thought. How often do we fail to see the people behind the labels? Barron walked toward a quiet bench under a large oak tree, its branches swaying gently in the breeze. The shade offered a peaceful respite, and he sat down, letting the moment wash over him. The world around him continued to move, but for just a moment, he allowed himself to breathe, to savor the stillness. And as he sat there, a thought bubbled to the surface of his mind, one that hadn't occurred to him until now. This wasn't just about defending my father. This was about speaking the truth, about reminding everyone, myself included, that there's always more to the story. The light from the setting sun filtered through the leaves above, casting soft patterns on the ground, like 1,000 little memories waiting to be seen. Barron leaned back, letting the image soak into his mind. The world was bigger than just today's class, bigger than any single conversation. But in this moment, he realized that sometimes, the smallest moments, the ones that seem insignificant at the time, have the power to shape everything that comes after. The sound of footsteps approached, but he didn't look up. He didn't need to. The professor was standing a few feet away, coffee cup in hand, a quiet presence in the peaceful evening air. She had found him, or perhaps he had found her. She paused, looking at him with an expression that was no longer one of critique, but of something deeper, something like understanding. "Mind if I sit?" she asked, her voice softer now, not the sharpness that had filled the room earlier. Barron smiled faintly, gesturing to the empty space on the bench beside him. "Of course." She sat down, her movements slower now, more reflective. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the rustling of the leaves above them, the quiet hum of life around them. Finally, Professor Riley spoke, her voice filled with an unexpected humility. "You know, Barron, I've been teaching for over 20 years, and I can count on one hand the number of times a student has made me rethink everything I thought I knew." Barron looked at her, his eyes soft, not seeking approval, but understanding. "It wasn't about changing your mind," he said quietly. "It was about finding a space where we could both see the truth, even if it's not the whole truth. She nodded, her eyes thoughtful. And I think we both found it today. Barron nodded, feeling something deep stir inside him, an understanding that went beyond words. He wasn't just changing minds, he was helping people see. And that, he realized, was enough. As the sun dipped lower, casting a soft golden glow over the courtyard, Barron sat in the quiet company of his professor, the world around them fading into the background. The moment stretched on, slow and meaningful, like the end of a song that you never want to end. And in that moment, Barron understood something he hadn't before. The journey to understanding isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's the quiet moments that matter the most. And as the shadows lengthened, he knew that this was just the beginning. In life, it's easy to judge others based on what we've heard or what we've seen on the surface. However, every person has their own unique story, filled with triumphs and failures that may not always be visible to the outside world. What's important is that we don't judge someone solely based on their mistakes or achievements. Instead, we must look at them as a whole, including their values, contributions, and untold experiences. Barron Trump's story in the script reminds us that the truth is often not just in the negative aspects we see most clearly, but also in the positive qualities we might overlook. Learning to see others from different perspectives, with understanding and compassion, not only helps us form a fairer view, but also builds stronger relationships. When faced with challenges, remember that every story has two sides, and understanding the untold parts can bring peace and wisdom into our lives. If this story resonated with you, if you feel inspired to look beyond the surface and see the deeper truths in life, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. By doing so, you'll stay connected to more meaningful content that inspires reflection and growth. Together, let's keep spreading the message of understanding and compassion. And remember, may God bless America.